acid reflux, persistent heartburn, chronic belching. If your digestive concerns are making you uncomfortable, talk with the caring specialists at Minji Digestive Health. They're to listen and provide the relief to ease your unease. So while you wouldn't mention your stomach acid backflow during, say, a job interview, we'd love to hear about it. We're comfortable talking about the uncomfortable. Go to Minji.com, MNGI.com. Chronic constipation, irritable bowels, excessive flatulence. If your digestive concerns are making you uncomfortable, talk with the caring specialists at Minji Digestive Health. They're to listen and provide the relief to ease your unease. So while you wouldn't want to bring up your inflamed hemorrhoids on, say, a first date, we're all ears. We're comfortable talking about the uncomfortable. Go to Minji.com, MNGI.com.
The Moabite Cipher by R. Austin Freeman. A large and motley crowd lined the pavements of Oxford Street as Thorndyke and I made our way leisurely eastward. Floral decorations and drooping bunting announced one of those functions inaugurated from time to time by a benevolent government for the entertainment of fashionable loungers and the relief of distressed pickpockets. For a Russian Grand Duke, who had torn himself away amidst valedictory explosions from a loving if too demonstrative people, was to pass anon on his way to the Guildhall, and a British prince, heroically indiscreet, was expected to occupy a seat in the ducal carriage. Near Rathbone Place, Thorndyke halted, and drew my attention to a smart-looking man who was lounging in a doorway, cigarette in hand. "Our old friend, Inspector Badger," said Thorndyke. "He seems mightily interested in that gentleman in the light overcoat. How do you do, Badger?" For at this moment the detective caught his eye and bowed. "Who is your friend?" "That's what I'd like to know, sir," replied the inspector. "I've been shadowing him for the last half hour, but I can't make him out, though I believe I've seen him somewhere. He don't look like a foreigner, but he has something bulky in his pocket, so I must keep him in sight until the Duke is safely past. I wish," he added gloomily, "these beastly Russians would stop at home. They give us no end of trouble." "Are you expecting any occurrences, then?" asked Thorndyke. "Bless you, sir," exclaimed Badger, "the whole route is lined with plainclothesmen. You see, it is known that several desperate characters followed the Duke to England, and there are a good many exiles living here who would like to have a rap at him. Hallo! What's he up to now?" The man in the light overcoat had suddenly caught the inspector's too inquiring eye, and forthwith dived into the crowd at the edge of the pavement. In his haste he trod heavily on the foot of a big, rough-looking man, by whom he was in a moment hustled out into the road with such violence that he fell sprawling face downwards. It was an unlucky moment. A mounted constable was just then backing in upon the crowd, and before he could gather the meaning of the shout that arose from the bystanders, his horse had set down one hind hoof firmly on the prostrate man's back. The inspector signalled to a constable, who forthwith made a way for us through the crowd, but even as we approached the injured man he rose stiffly and looked round with a pale, vacant face. "Are you hurt?" Thorndyke asked gently, with an earnest look into the frightened, wondering eyes. "No, sir," was the reply, "only I feel queer, sinking, just here." He laid a trembling hand on his chest, and Thorndyke, still eyeing him anxiously, said in a low voice to the inspector, "Cab or ambulance, as quickly as you can." A cab was led round from Newman Street, and the injured man put into it. Thorndyke, Badger, and I entered, and we drove off up Rathbone Place. As we proceeded, our patient's face grew more and more ashen, drawn, and anxious. His breathing was shallow and uneven, and his teeth chattered slightly. The cab swung round into Goodge Street, and then, suddenly, in the twinkling of an eye, there came a change. The eyelids and jaw relaxed, the eyes became filmy, and the whole form subsided into the corner in a shrunken heap, with the strange gelatinous limpness of a body that is dead as a whole, while its tissues are still alive. "God save us! The man's dead!" exclaimed the inspector in a shocked voice, for even policemen have their feelings. He sat staring at the corpse, as it nodded gently with the jolting of the cab, until we drew up inside the courtyard of the Middlesex Hospital, when he got out briskly, with suddenly renewed cheerfulness, to help the porter to place the body on the wheeled couch. "Well, we shall know who he is now, at any rate," said he, as we followed the couch to the casualty room. Thorndyke nodded unsympathetically. The medical instinct in him was for the moment stronger than the legal. The house surgeon leaned over the couch and made a rapid examination as he listened to our account of the incident. Then he straightened himself up and looked at Thorndyke. "Internal hemorrhage, I expect," said he. "At any rate, he's dead, poor beggar, as dead as Nebuchadnezzar. Ah, here comes the bobby. It's his affair now." A sergeant came into the room, breathing quickly, and looked in surprise from the corpse to the inspector. But the latter, without loss of time, proceeded to turn out the dead man's pockets, commencing with the bulky object which had first attracted his attention, which proved to be a brown paper parcel tied up with red tape. "Pork pie, begad!" he exclaimed with a crestfallen air as he cut the tape and opened the package. "You had better go through his other pockets, Sergeant." The small heap of odds and ends that resulted from this process tended, with a single exception, to throw little light on the man's identity, the exception being a letter, sealed but not stamped, addressed in an exceedingly illiterate hand to Mr. Adolf Schonberg, 213 Greek Street, Soho. "He was going to leave it by hand, I expect," observed the inspector, with a wistful glance at the sealed envelope. "I think I'll take it round myself, and you had better come with me, Sergeant." He slipped the letter into his pocket, and leaving the sergeant to take possession of the other effects, made his way out of the building. "I suppose, Doctor," said he, as we crossed into Berner Street, "you are not coming our way? Don't want to see Mr. Schonberg, Thornburg reflected for a moment. "Well, it isn't very far, and we may as well see the end of the incident. Yes, let's go together." Number 213, Greek Street, was one of those houses that irresistibly suggest to the observer the idea of a church organ, either jamb of the doorway being adorned with a row of brass bell handles corresponding to stop knobs. These the sergeant examined with the air of an expert musician, and having, as it were, gauged the capacity of the instrument, selected the middle knob on the right side and pulled it briskly, whereupon a first-floor window was thrown up and a head protruded. But it afforded us a momentary glimpse only, for having caught the sergeant's upturned eye, it retired with surprising precipitancy, and before we had time to speculate on the apparition, the street door was opened and a man emerged. He was about to close the door after him when the inspector interposed. "Does Mr. Adolf Schonberg live here?" The newcomer, a very typical Jew of the red-haired type, surveyed us thoughtfully through his gold-rimmed spectacles as he repeated the name. "Schonberg? Schonberg? Ah, yes, I know. He lives on the 3rd floor. I saw him go up a short time ago. 3rd floor, back." And indicating the open door with a wave of the hand, he raised his hat and passed into the street. "I suppose we had better go up," said the inspector, with a dubious glance at the row of bell-pulls. He accordingly started up the stairs, and we all followed in his wake. There were 2 doors at the back of the 3rd floor, but as the one was open, displaying an unoccupied bedroom, the inspector rapped smartly on the other. It flew open almost immediately, and a fierce-looking little man confronted us with a hostile stare. "Well?" said he. "Mr. Adolf Schonberg?" inquired the inspector. "Well, what about him?" snapped our new acquaintance. "I wish to have a few words with him," said Badger. "Then what the deuce do you come banging at my door for?" demanded the other. "Why, doesn't he live here?" "No. 1st floor front," replied our friend, preparing to close the door. "Pardon me," said Thorndyke, "but what is Mr. Schonberg like? I mean—" "Like?" interrupted the resident. "He's like a blooming sheeny, with a carroty beard and gold gig lamps." And having presented this impressionist sketch, he brought the interview to a definite close by slamming the door and turning the key. With a wrathful exclamation, the inspector turned toward the stairs, down which the sergeant was already clattering in hot haste, and made his way back to the ground floor, followed, as before, by Thorndyke and me. On the doorstep we found the sergeant breathlessly interrogating a smartly dressed youth, whom I had seen alight from a hansom as we entered the house, and who now stood with a notebook tucked under his arm, sharpening a pencil with deliberate care. "Mr. James saw him come out, sir," said the sergeant. "He turned up towards the square." "Did he seem to hurry?" asked the inspector. "Rather," replied the reporter. "As soon as you were inside, he went off like a lamplighter. You won't catch him now." "We don't want to catch him," the detective rejoined gruffly. Then, backing out of earshot of the eager pressman, he said in a lower tone, "That was Mr. Schonberg, beyond a doubt, and it is clear that he has some reason for making himself scarce, so I shall consider myself justified in opening that note." He suited the action to the word, and having cut the envelope open with official neatness, drew out the enclosure. "My hat!" he exclaimed, as his eye fell upon the contents. "What in creation is this? It isn't shorthand, but what the deuce is it?" He handed the document to Thorndyke, who, having held it up to the light and felt the paper critically, proceeded to examine it with keen interest. It consisted of a single half-sheet of thin note-paper, both sides of which were covered with strange crabbed characters, written with a brownish-black ink in continuous lines, without any spaces to indicate the divisions into words, and, but for the modern material which bore the writing, it might have been a portion of some ancient manuscript or forgotten codex. "What do you make of it, Doctor?" inquired the inspector anxiously, after a pause, during which Thorndyke had scrutinized the strange writing with knitted brows. "Not a great deal," replied Thorndyke. "The character is the Moabite or Phoenician primitive Semitic, in fact, and reads from right to left. The language I take to be Hebrew. At any rate, I can find no Greek words, and I see here a group of letters which may form one of the few Hebrew words that I know, the word badim, lies. But you had better get it deciphered by an expert." "If it is Hebrew," said Badger, "we can manage it all right. There are plenty of Jews at our disposal." "You had better take that paper to the British Museum," said Thorndyke, "and submit it to the keeper of the Phoenician antiquities for decipherment." Inspector Badger smiled a foxy smile as he deposited the paper in his pocketbook. "We'll see what we can make of it ourselves first," he said. "But many thanks for your advice all the same, Doctor. No, Mr. James, I can't give you any information just at present. You had better apply at the hospital." "I suspect," said Thorndyke, as we took our way homewards, "that Mr. James has collected enough material for his purpose already. He must have followed us from the hospital, and I have no doubt that he has his report with full details mentally arranged at this moment. And I am not sure that he didn't get a peep at the mysterious paper in spite of the inspector's precautions." "By the way," I said, "what do you make of the document?" "A cipher, most probably," he replied. "It is written in the primitive Semitic alphabet, which, as you know, is practically identical with primitive Greek. It is written from right to left like the Phoenician, Hebrew, and Moabite, as well as the earliest Greek inscriptions. The paper is common cream-laid notepaper, and the ink is ordinary indelible Chinese ink, such as is used by draftsmen. Those are the facts, and without further study of the document itself, they don't carry us very far. Why do you think it is a cipher rather than a document in straightforward Hebrew?" "Because it is obviously a secret message of some kind. Now, every educated Jew knows more or less Hebrew, and although he is able to read and write only the modern square Hebrew character, it is so easy to transpose one alphabet into another that the mere language would afford no security. Therefore, I expect that, when the experts translate this document, the translation or transliteration will be a mere farrago of unintelligible nonsense. But we shall see, and meanwhile the facts that we have offer several interesting suggestions which are well worth consideration." "As for instance?" "Now, my dear Jervis," said Thorndyke, shaking an admonitory forefinger at me, "don't, I pray you, give way to mental indolence. You have these few facts that I have mentioned. Consider them separately and collectively, and in their relation to the circumstances. Don't attempt to suck my brain when you have an excellent brain of your own to suck."
This is an ad by BetterHelp. What are your self-care non-negotiables? It's hard to make time for the things that keep you healthy. But being consistent with self-care is like working a muscle. And when life gets crazy, that muscle keeps you strong. Therapy is the ultimate self-care. And BetterHelp makes it easy to get started with affordable online sessions you can do from anywhere. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com today to get 10% off your first month.
On the following morning, the papers fully justified my colleague's opinion of Mr. James. All the events which had occurred, as well as a number that had not, were given in the fullest and most vivid detail, a lengthy reference being made to the paper found on the person of the dead anarchist and written in a private shorthand or cryptogram. The report concluded with the gratifying, though untrue, statement that, in this intricate and important case, the police have wisely secured the assistance of Dr. John Thorndyke, to whose acute intellect and vast experience the portentous cryptogram will doubtless soon deliver up its secret. "Very flattering," laughed Thorndyke, to whom I read the extract on his return from the hospital, "but a little awkward if it should induce our friends to deposit a few trifling mementos in the form of nitro compounds on our main staircase or in the cellars. By the way, I met Superintendent Miller on London Bridge. The cryptogram, as Mr. James calls it, has set Scotland Yard in a mighty ferment." "Naturally. What have they done in the matter?" "They adopted my suggestion, after all, finding that they could make nothing of it themselves, and took it to the British Museum. The museum people referred them to Professor Popelbaum, the great paleographer, to whom they accordingly submitted it." "Does he express any opinion about it?" "Yes, provisionally. After a brief examination, he found it to consist of a number of Hebrew words sandwiched between apparently meaningless groups of letters. He furnished the superintendent offhand with a translation of the words, and Miller forthwith struck off a number of hectograph copies of it, which he has distributed among the senior officials of his department, so that at present—" here Thorndyke gave a vent to a soft chuckle— Scotland Yard is engaged in a sort of missing word, or rather missing sense competition.